Computer hackers, are they technology pioneers? Or are they simply high-tech pirates? Joining me now to talk about computers, privacy, and the law, John Barlow. He's founder of the Electronic Frontier Foundation, lyricist for the Grateful Dead. Emmanuel Goldstein, editor of 2600, The Hacker Quarterly. Don Delaney, New York State Police senior investigator. And Bruce Sterling, author of The Hacker Crackdown, Law and Disorder on the Electronic Frontier. Welcome. It's good to have you. Let me just have you guys take us into this world of hackers and world of internet and what is it, what is the nature of this computer world and how is it connected and what information is there and how can some people gain access to it and what are they doing with the information that they gain access to? What could they do? Is it legal? Is it illegal? How do you make some legal analogy to what some hackers are doing? Is there a hacker's code of ethics? All of those questions I want to get into. Start with you, Emmanuel.
It's probably the most exciting time in history to be alive because technology is moving ahead at such a breathtaking pace. Your extent of involvement depends on how much you want to get involved yourself. Anybody can get involved. Anybody can get linked in. A lot of people are afraid to get linked in. Some people are afraid that certain things are wrong, and I maintain that certain things are not wrong. Things such as exploration, things such as wandering around systems and learning about them. What I do think is wrong is destroying information, doing things that that result in a crime of some sort being committed. And there's a lot of disagreement on that.
Just about everybody in this audience is linked in some way already. I mean, if you make a phone call, you go to cyberspace.
And cyberspace is
if you do any kind of informational transaction with another being, you know, whether it's a computer or a human, you are having some kind of cyberspace transaction. If it's information.
Because somewhere that information is being put into a computer somewhere, whether it's with your bank, whether it's a phone company, whether it's some credit investigative agency that has your information.
You live much of your life. Is already dwelled in this virtual world. Much of your life is already there. It's invisible. It's where your money is right now. Exactly. Unless you got a bunch of Krugerrands out buried in the back of the garden.
And it's where the details of your life are in many ways.
Oh yes.
Yeah. Well, it's actually an odd little edit of the details of your life. Usually slightly wrong and usually very misleading, taken out of context.
Okay. And what are hackers doing? Are they, because of their own genius and because of their knowledge, able to do what?
They're doing what every 14-year-old to 20-year-old boy has wanted to do since the dawn of time. They're violating, they're forbidden.
Yeah, they're going where they're not supposed to.
They're going where they're not supposed to go.
And how do you feel about that?
Well, I was a 15-year-old boy once.
Yeah, so it's okay in your judgment? So it's okay?
No, I didn't say that.
All right,
I didn't say that. I mean, first of all, it wouldn't be any fun if it were okay.
However, as Emmanuel says, the exploration end of it, he believes should be allowed. There are federal laws and state laws that make it illegal to engage in this exploration of someone else's computer. With regards to the privacy issue, corporations have the right to their privacy and have the right to secure their systems, or at least try to, and have the right to have people not part of that corporation out of their computer. It lends itself toward corporate espionage if you allow people to explore. Research and development can be stolen by corporations who don't have the money to spend it on it. And there is a wide variety of the different offenses, as well as the amount of time that you'd spend in jail if you get caught or prosecuted for these offenses.
Yeah. Tell me about the kinds of things that are going on that are in fact illegal, that how hackers are getting access to phones, systems, and able to make free phone calls, that kind of thing.
It's really, most of the time, it's simply the incredible ease with which doors are left wide open. Phone companies simply don't learn from their mistakes. Things that happened 10 years ago are still possible. The passwords have not been changed in years. Phone codes are extremely short or easy to guess. It's a lot of times, too, hackers are only the people that discover this, and the people down in the Port Authority that are selling phone codes, those aren't hackers. Right. Obviously, those are criminals that are making a profit. Hackers, as a rule, do not make profit. They're not very good at it, for one thing. But for the most part, they're interested in just defeating the system. For instance, if I have a system and I want to learn how to defeat it, I think I should have the right to figure it out. And then once I figure it out, what I do from that point on determines if I'm a hacker or a criminal. If I go to the company and say, you have a hole here, You should fix it.
Yeah.
At
Well,
this point,
seriously,
people
though,
are
I
afraid
wouldn't
of
want to
it.
see. I wouldn't want to see simple exploration a legal act for a variety of reasons. I mean, people do make mistakes.
Well, it already is a legal act in the real world.
No, well, I mean, a literally legal act. I think there has to be some constraint on it.
However, though, when you do discover a hole, you don't give it to the corporation. You publish the 2600 magazine, which tells the entire world where these holes are.
Emmanuel publishes the 2600 magazine.
But the corporation reads it along with everybody else.
No, well, nobody from the corporation reads it, as far as I can
If they don't
tell.
read it, that's that's their problem. But anybody who looks into this, because the corporation themselves may not be the only people that have this problem. If it's a problem with a particular kind of Unix system, we'll say what the problem is, and people will, if they have that kind of Unix system, their ears will perk up and they'll do something about it, or they won't do something about it if they don't care, or if they refuse to believe there's a problem.
Well,
and that's a lot of what I see. People
Clearly,
refusing to believe there's a problem.
lot of people that have systems aren't aware of the security issues. They're unaware that they have default codes on the systems that can enable a hacker to get in, or anyone for that matter. We've handled over the past 2 years more than 100 PBX fraud cases, where the great majority
What's
of the
a PBX fraud case?
PBX is a phone branch exchange, or basically a computerized switchboard. When you dial in, you may be prompted for code, which when you hit the right code will give you dial tone. You then can out dial to anywhere in the world, and the bill goes to the company who owned the PBX. And typically these losses are between $50,000 to $500,000. Some people have lost more than $1 million in these cases. But in the past 2 years, over 150 of these cases where I've interviewed the complainants, the great majority say, the vendor of the equipment never told me anything about a remote access unit. They never told me anything about security. They left a manual here, but they said it's already got default codes on there which will protect you. And these people end up getting these bills, and they have to pay them. The telephone company doesn't absorb the loss.
And that's the really criminal act, is selling these incredibly I mean, there are criminal acts all over the place, and we don't defend. I mean, I'm glad for the work you do.
All right. Well, let me, Bruce.
Selling these systems like this is crazy.
Bruce's book, as I said, was Hacker Crackdown: Law and Disorder on the Electronic Frontier.
Yes.
Other than the kinds of things we're talking about with the PBX and the phone company,
Right.
What else are hackers doing? What kinds of records are they finding access to? What kinds of skill is required to be able to do this? What kind of defenses are companies taking? You know, and
Well, I'd like to see the whole business of breaking into computers demystified to an extent,
that's
because
what I want you to
know
do.
it seems like an almost magical act to a lot of people, and they really feel like, say, these whiz kids are out there and they're just running rings around the police and so forth and so on. And it's not really the case. I mean, if you want to spy on people and find things out about them, it's very simple. You do very simple things. You can call them up and pretend to be somebody else. Just deceive them over the phone verbally. It's called social engineering.
and
It's
how
almost,
does it, well, give us an example of how that works.
well, suppose you're a bright teenager or something, and you want to just learn something about someone, or usually it's how to break into a computer system. Well, you learn some of the jargon of the profession, and then you can call up some low-level flunky on the system and say, and lower your voice a couple of octaves and say, "Hi, this is Moriarty over in maintenance, and are you having a little trouble with your lines?" And of course they will say that they do, because they always are. They always are. And you just sort of say, "Well, we're going to try and help you out here, and I believe I've got a look on your system. Would you log in, please?" And and then they will just
And then you're off and running.
That's right. They'll give you their password. They'll give you all the information. I mean, they just assume that you're a technician, and they feel
to be helped.
they're very grateful, and they just bend over backward to help you.
People are always the weakest link.
Another
People
very
are the weakest link.
people are
That's where
always
you can
the
always
weakest
break through with the people.
Right. You can get people to change their passwords. You can get them to
You can do
run the
what?
system.
You come in and say, "I'd like you to change your password," and they'll say,
You can call somebody and say, "Listen, you have to change your password because there are hackers out there."
Yeah.
And you can tell them to change the password to something that you've decided, and you can tell them to run the system in a certain way. And most of the time, if this happens, it's not for evil purposes. It's as a lark of a sort.
With these smart cards that are now out that have an algorithm on it which matches the algorithm on the computer, and they change every 60 seconds or every 2 minutes, it makes passwording computers much more safe for the corporation. There's going to be a tremendous decrease in computer fraud and computer crime, at least at the corporate level and the telephone company level, because where they were most vulnerable in the ports that the maintenance people used, now they're going to these cards, and only those maintenance people with that card, with that algorithm, will be able to access that system.
Having said that, suppose someone, and I just want to make sure that we understand the difference between being able to have access to information and being able to switch the information. This kind of thing, I suspect. People who can go inside and look at their bank account, or somebody else's bank account, or their bank account, let's say. They gain access to their bank account, and where they had $1,000 in the bank account, all of a sudden they can switch some numbers around because they have access to that file, and the computer now reflects $100,000 in their bank account. Can hackers do that?
Well, you know, the interesting thing is, literally in some cases, yes, though accessing information is a great deal easier than changing it.
Okay.
A great deal easier in almost every case. But the principal obstacle is a social obstacle, a cultural obstacle. The people who do most hacking, I mean, the folks who consider themselves to be computer intruders as sport, find it really abomination to change anybody's data. I mean, they'll get drummed out of the core for that.
Because that's some kind of hacker's ethic or hacker's code?
Well, it's just not done.
It's common sense.
Yeah.
It's the values you're brought up with. But I'd just like to set one thing clear. Hackers cannot go and transfer vast amounts of money.
Because?
It's very difficult to do, for one thing.
There has been a case of a $10 million theft in that manner.
That was not an inside job?
No, that wasn't, but the majority of these cases are inside
You make
jobs.
a good point, which we should point out, that most of the cases of criminal fraud because of changing changing numbers within the computer system are somebody on the inside who gains
embezzlement
access.
is embezzlement, whether you're using a keyboard or a fountain pen. It doesn't really make any difference. It's the same crime.
More than 70% of computer crime, so says Don Parker from SRI, is done by insiders, and a mere 30% by people actually hacking into a system from outside.
What about this? There was a movie not long ago, 10 years ago. What was it called?
War Games.
War Games, that's right. What about political terrorism somehow being able to gain access to Pentagon computer systems, the Internet of...
Well, you know, I haven't heard. Well, I haven't heard anything about young men going out into payphones to start World War III. I mean, it's
but you laugh about that. But somebody might say, well, sure, most young men are not doing that, and most hackers are not. But I raised the question: could someone do that, and a much more sophisticated hacker if he was not like the majority of hackers?
I would worry, and I do worry about political dirty tricks operatives using these techniques to, hunt down stuff on political candidates. And I also worry a lot about the security of car phones and cellular phones. Because there's been like an increasing amount of political scandal from people going out here and just broadband scanning. I mean, there was real trouble in Canada. They overheard, a confidential phone remark about the Canadian constitutional thing. It became blown up in the newspapers. It may have led to the dissolution of Canada. I mean, that's the country north of us.
Well, a senator from Virginia is in serious trouble, political trouble, because of the same kind of thing.
That's true, because, yes, people out there scanning. And
it's a long way to World War III.
I feel that's more of a security threat than breaking into computers in a big way.
But could political terrorists use hackers?
In fact, we've arrested, New York State Police arrested a teenager by the name of Zod a few years ago. One of the things he did was get into the Secretary of the Air Force computer at the Pentagon. He also was into a university computer on the West Coast, and what he basically did was put bulletin board systems in there and ran them for shareware, for sharing proprietary software to other people that would dial in on these 800 numbers into these systems. So it was free for you to dial in, and you could trade software. So if he can do it at the age of 14, people in other places can do it.
To answer that question, though, there's a very important thing that people need to understand, which is that the command and control of the really serious hardware that this country owns is completely quarantined and isolated. The Secretary of the Air Force has 2 duplicate systems that he has access to, and one of them is almost impossible to get into unless you are part of that infrastructure. Unless you're part of the
general, say.
Yeah, a rogue, exactly.
Let's say, give me an example of what a rogue general could do.
Well, a fellow just loses it, basically, and if he were in command of these systems already, I don't see why he couldn't embezzle some kind of order to commit some kind of military act. I doubt he could start World War III, but he could probably make a great deal of trouble. And I wouldn't put it past a foreign intelligence apparatus to be able to do something like that. It's just that, to do something really ambitious along that scale, I think it would take 20 or 30 teenagers, really brilliant ones, all working in tandem for at least 2 years. And believe me, you get any 20 of these guys in the same room, it's like trying to herd mice. I mean, It's like the French used to say, the French secret police, they used to say this about revolutionary groups. They said, you know, in every 10 conspirators, there are 6 well-meaning fools, 3 police agents, and 1 genuinely dangerous man. And, you know.
This is a man who writes fiction, too, isn't it? And science fiction.
Well, that's true.
It's true.
But it's still true.
Right. We're protected by the
We are protected by the disorganization.
You guys
and
keep
underground.
mentioning teenagers. Are most hackers teenagers?
Most hackers tend to be young, and the reason for that is because those of us who are young at heart are into things like exploring adventure, and we don't really pay all that much attention to the evil things that authority figures say to us. And that's something that a lot of law enforcement people seem to miss. They say, well, you're breaking into a computer system, you could cause millions and millions of dollars worth of damage, therefore you're equivalent to a mobster. And a teenager just will not see that and will not stop doing it because there's plenty of ways to remain undetected. Yeah. It doesn't mean that the person is a gangster and is going to destroy the world. However, if, as you say, someone is able to get into a military system and cause some kind of a problem somewhere, it's I don't think a worldwide war or something like that is possible. But if they were, it's not their problem. It's the problem of the system being insecure.
Who was the fellow that was hired? Was he hired by the government to track down? And Nova, I think the PBS show Nova did a story about it.
You mean Cliff Stoll?
Cliff Stoll,
yeah.
Right. And what was that case about?
He actually wasn't hired by the government, well, except insofar as he was hired by Lawrence Berkeley Laboratories to supervise part of their computers. And he found somebody who was breaking in, who was basically pulling a fast one on the KGB. This fellow was selling the KGB something that they could have gone out and bought very simply anywhere.
And they thought that he was getting it because of some sophisticated knowledge of how to break into computer systems.
So he was exploring, he was going in and getting pieces of Unix source code, which AT&T wouldn't be that happy about, but was not exactly, he didn't imperil the future of the Republic in any way.
A couple of quick, go ahead.
The ironic thing about Clifford Stoll is that he violated all the rules that he said he was trying to protect. He spied on users. He stole hardware from other offices. That's not really a big deal in the same organization, but he did all kinds. Yeah, he borrowed things. He basically, for his purposes, he violated the same rules that he was trying to catch somebody else for violating. Yeah, and it goes to show something.
I think it's true that Cliff had a lot in common with the people he was pursuing, but we have to give Cliff this: at least he was not working for the KGB. This is the group that gave us the Lubyanka, Gulag Archipelago.
He was working for the folks that gave us the atomic bomb.
Yeah, well.
Solzhenitsyn.
Yeah. Well,
yeah,
I think what these chaos computer people did was truly reprehensible. And I said so publicly, and I got some electronic mail back.
All right, let me a couple of things I got to get to.
From them.
It was not a chaos thing, though. Chaos is a group pretty much like 2600 over there that reports on things, but they're not active hackers themselves.
But as Emmanuel said,
they were Hamburg group people. But
a person who gets into a system that's young doesn't understand what they're doing. In the case of IDG, when their company was hit, which is a publishing company, 2 children, or 2 teenagers, got into their voicemail system, knocked them offline. They didn't get advertising in for the period of a month. They published without it. They lost $2 million. And these 2 kids didn't have any idea what they were doing.
They used 3-digit passwords.
Yeah. Right.
Well, they use the same password for every account on the system.
3-digit password.
Yes.
Yeah. Tell me about Operation Sun Devil and how that came about.
Well, that was done by the federal government and with the Attorney General's office in Arizona. The New York State Police had nothing to do with that case.
You know about it because you're
aware of it.
With what
they executed, I believe, 27 search warrants over a 3-day period across the country for people that had been on elite bulletin boards where pirated software had been and things like that.
What happens? They use these bulletin boards to sell stuff that people do, or
they swap software, and they will post on some bulletin boards stolen credit card numbers, stolen telephone, credit card numbers, Visa accounts.
The interesting thing there, though, is that they had, my figures could be rusty at this point, but they had a 2-year investigation with the Secret Service and Attorney General's offices from several states, had 27 search warrants executed, confiscated a lot of equipment, brought precisely 1 charge, and to the best of my knowledge have returned none of the equipment. And if they don't bring a charge, those kids don't have an opportunity to get their equipment back without suing the United States government, which is probably not something they're going to do.
Let me raise this question at last. It is, I hear you, Emmanuel, saying, look, a lot of this stuff, there's nothing wrong with doing this as long as it's simply accessing information, because you're not thrilled that this information is there anyway. And if you want to go off on this little exploration to find out what's in somebody's credit report, that's just fine, because you're not thrilled the fact that the people have that information on other people anyway.
Well, it's, for instance, if I look at my credit report, whose privacy am I violating?
Okay, but suppose you look at mine.
Mm-hmm.
Just
if I
as
can
a
look at
fun,
yours,
you're out there and you want to say, I want to see what his credit report looks like.
If I can look at your credit rating, that means thousands of other people can do it too.
Okay, but so does that make it right? And does that make it okay with you?
I don't think it makes it right that it's there to be looked at by so many people.
But let's assume it is there. Then you're not happy that it's there. I make that point clear. But it's okay for you if hackers go look at anybody's credit information, because it's like a 14-year-old wandering onto a golf course.
It's a golf course. Yeah, it's there. It's there. It's wide open.
I could be wrong about this. I mean, I'm not spending every minute watching over their shoulders, but I don't detect that there's very much of that going on. I mean, that's not what they're interested in.
What are they interested in?
They're interested. It's the game.
It's showing that they can do it. Once they get there,
it's the labyrinth of the computer network. I mean, it's like speed
is it like somebody going to the bank and sliding down the skylight, and they fool with all of the alarms, and they disconnect the alarms, and they get inside the bank and they say, "See what a genius I am." Then they close it up and leave. Is that it?
That's closer to it, but they're not even interested in the bank necessarily. They're interested in the labyrinth of the phone company more often than not.
Most of the times it's access to the network.
Yes.
A lot of people don't have access to the network. They need a way in. And what you have now, today, for the first time, you have inner city kids that are getting access to the computer network, to the internet for the first time. And all of a sudden, everybody is crying, oh my God, these inner city kids are getting into the internet, and they're going to destroy everything because they're going to go wilding throughout the cyberspace. And all they want is a way to communicate, is a way to learn about the networks. I think it's the equivalent.
Is this the best way to do that?
Well, there's no other way for them.
If you're an inner city kid and you want to learn Unix, I mean, you want to be part of the 21st century, and you want to have those tools in your head, you aren't going to go out and spend $6,000 on a Sun workstation, now are you?
No.
You're going to borrow somebody else's.
Right. And so if you do, and how do they do that? Where do they have access to the keyboard to do that?
Well, you can get an Atari 2600 and
the terminal isn't the issue. You can get a terminal for virtually nothing.
And you get a modem.
And a modem for virtually nothing. But then you get into something that allows you to wander around on the network. It's equivalent to going to, say, a community college and sitting in on a class without paying for it.
Yeah. Right.
You know, you don't charge the person with trespassing and send them to prison for 5 years for doing that.
Okay.
You know, you let them stay sometimes, or you just kick them out.
And I would make the practical point that if a 15-year-old goes and looks at my credit rating, he can't deny me credit.
Yeah.
There are people around who can look at my credit rating and then affect my life directly. My landlord, for instance.
However, what they'll do is use your credit card information, and they'll engage in carding and purchase stolen.
Well, that's true. But if somebody is a credit card thief.
Well, there happens
Well, wait,
to be.
no hackers are criminals, you're saying? No hackers are doing anything that's illegal?
If you do the kind of thing that Don says, you're a criminal.
All right, Don.
In executing more than 20 search warrants of computer hackers now for hacking-type crimes. In their notebooks, which we seize when we do these things, usually will be credit card accounts that have been compromised. There will be the accounts on TRW, CBI, TransUnion, and the means to get in and obtain this credit card information. And in the people that we've arrested for carding, purchasing items with stolen credit card numbers, most of them have gotten this information from computers.
Now, did they get?
Wait a second.
Go ahead, John.
Are you saying that the same set of people, you go out and you bust a hacker and you find those credit card numbers?
Yes.
Is he actually using those credit cards to purchase items? Or?
Yes. In fact, in the case of Zod, in his living room, still in the box, was a brand new NEC multi-sync monitor that had been purchased with a stolen credit card number.
Well, it's useless to deny that people in the underground go carding. That happens all the time.
Yeah, but I'm not denying it. I'm just saying that we're talking
But
about.
I thought that.
I'm familiar
but I thought
with
Emmanuel
maybe
was denying it.
Well, he's denying it because he doesn't see it. I see it.
He's just denying them the noble title of hacker.
Once they engage in a crime,
anybody
they're
who
no
does
longer
this,
a
by
hacker.
definition, is not a hacker.
Don't write that stuff.
This stuff goes on. Carding happens all the time.
Once they commit a criminal act, they're no longer a hacker. Then now they're a criminal.
I got less than 30. What fears do you have? Genuine fears about this sort of new electronic frontier?
The worst fear I have is that when property becomes something so much like speech as this stuff is, that trying to regulate it is going to regulate speech, and we're either going to speak freely or we're not.
Okay.
It's a tough decision.
My fear is that encryption is going to come online with the telephone companies. and digitizing of the telephone lines, and we're no longer going to be able to do wiretaps during kidnapping, homicide investigations, narcotics importation cases. It's a real problem. There's a lot of aspects to this issue which are up in the air.
Bruce.
I think we need to preserve the basic values of the American Republic. We have to respect our Constitution, even in cyberspace.
Okay.
A lot of young people are getting very negative views of the United States government because of strong-arm tactics that kind of jump the gun, that tell people not to even try thinking about something. And that's what I fear most.
Okay. Thank all of you. Pleasure to have you here, and we may come back to this sometime. In the meantime, we'll take a break and be back with Curtis Lewa. Stay with us.